Welcome to Season 3, Episode 19 of Read by the Author. Tonight is the season finale. We're going to be finishing Time Anomaly. I'm going to make some announcements of what to expect for the next 2 seasons, so definitely stick around after I finish reading for that update. So let's get into the book and finish her up. 48. Deception and Conception. No matter how impossible it seemed, no matter how much I didn't want to believe, Apep had somehow found a way into Marcus's body. Without warning, the world froze around us, and not by my hand. Apep had stopped time, using the chute within Marcus. I shook my head, denying the information my eyes showed me was truth. Apep was possessing Marcus, absolutely and completely. Apep had full access to his power. And the only way to get him out of Marcus's body, the only way to give my universe any kind of a chance, was to kill Marcus. My stomach twisted and my heart sank. How? The word was barely a whisper.
Such a useless query, but I think I shall satisfy your curiosity anyway,
Apep said, speaking with Marcus's lips and tongue, but sounding completely different from the man I loved.
When you reunited the 2 fractured pieces of my chute during your little dalliance earlier, the power set held wasn't the only thing you pulled into your lover's body.
Apep Marcus bowed his head to me.
I thank you for the rather sudden relocation.
He ran his hands down the front of Marcus's body.
I do very much enjoy the way this one fits, and the power.
He closed his eyes and groaned.
To feel my chute again, whole and throbbing with barely contained energy.
I licked my lips, scanning the statue-like people all around me, like one of them might hold the key to regaining access to the exhausted chute within me. But all I found were faces locked in expressions of confusion and horror and shock, and the power remained unusable. Apep Marcus disappeared in an explosion of misty colors. Before I could suck in a breath, before I could react at all, he reappeared behind me on the table. I spun around and stumbled backward, twisting my ankle as I slipped off the edge of the table. I landed in a heap on the floor and scrambled away from him. Grinning, he jumped off the table and stalked after me, his shoes silent on the polished floor.
It really is a pity that tearing Ra's chute out of you will destroy your body. I would have enjoyed playing with it.
He sighed, and I continued to flee, running into immovable chairs and table legs and people. Vines of aught burst up from the floor, wrapping around my legs and ankles, working their way up my limbs.
But now that the process has begun and you are fertile, we can't risk.
His eyes opened wide and his words cut off abruptly at the exact same time as what felt like a vacuous gravitational field burst to life in my middle. It pulled at the chute so inextricably wound throughout my ba, tearing it away and consuming the power. I felt like I had been doused in liquid nitrogen and was being shattered, and then I was on fire, flames consuming me from the inside out. I tried to scream, but I couldn't find my breath. At first, I thought it was Apep ripping the chute out of my body, killing me in the most painful way possible, eviscerating my soul. But when Apep Marcus dropped to his knees before me, threw his head back, and roared in agony, I wasn't so sure. Around us, time stuttered, then resumed its usual passing with a thunderous explosion of sound. People were suddenly moving all around us, but the pain continued to sear through me. Somehow, I managed to suck in a breath, and finally I screamed. Without warning, the agony ceased. I curled into the fetal position on the floor a few feet away from Marcus's body. Apep Marcus was no longer crying out. He was no longer moving. He was no longer breathing at all. No, 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 no. I crawled closer to him and shook him by the shoulder, gently at first, then using more and more force as his chest refused to rise and fall, as his heart refused to beat, as his body refused to live. "Nephi!" I yelled. "Aset! Help him!" I could hear people moving around me, heard Nephi curse at them as she pushed her way through the crowd of Negerettes, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from Marcus's face. It was absolutely devoid of any expression. Because he was gone. Dead. Someone grasped my shoulder and started pulling me backward. I twisted around to shove them away and found Ra Nekure's opalescent eyes only inches from my own.
"You must get away from him, Alexandra,"
he said.
"Now."
"No!" I yanked my shoulder out of his hold and turned back to Marcus's body just as an inky darkness started oozing out of his nose and mouth and ears. It headed straight toward me. A shimmering barrier of Ott appeared right in front of my face, and not a second too late. Apep slammed into it, spreading in a writhing mass like he was searching for the barrier's edge, for a way around so he could get to me. Except there were no edges. As the last of the inky darkness left Marcus's body, Ra Nekure surrounded Apep completely with the Ott barrier, creating a floating spherical prison large enough to hold several people and strong enough to contain the soul of a god. Slowly, the sphere shrunk, condensing the darkness inside. It grew deeper, denser, until an orb about the size of a baseball floated a few inches from my face, seeming to suck in the light around it. Marcus inhaled suddenly, just as Nephi slid to her knees beside him. His eyelids opened, and eyes of molten gold, not shimmering with divine power, skewered me. He was alive. Apep was gone, contained in a prison of solidified Ott, and Apep's chute was, well, I didn't know where. At that moment, I didn't care. I threw myself on top of Marcus and sobbed against his neck. "You came back! You came back!" I cried over and over again. "You were dead, but you came back to me." His arms encircled me, and his lips brushed feather-like kisses against my forehead and temple. He took hold of either side of my face and lifted my lips to his.
"Always,"
he murmured.
"I will always come back to you. Not even death could keep me away."
My whole body was shaking. "I don't understand what just happened. How you, Apep, he was possessing you, then..." I clung to him. "There was so much pain, and then you died. I just don't understand."
"I do,"
Ra Nekure said from behind me.
"Powerful new life forms within you, dear Alexandra, an irresistible host, or rather, hosts, for the shoots you both carried."
Slowly, I pulled back from Marcus and looked over my shoulder at Ra Nekure. What?
"Congratulations to you both."
He smiled, and I didn't think I had ever seen anyone look more pleased with himself.
"I'm sure you'll be wonderful parents."
49. Take and Give. Sitting at the end of one of the longer Ott tables near the center of the dining hall, Nekure tilted his head to the side, listening to something nobody else could hear. With a nod, he looked at me.
"He says that you must have conceived when you,
His eyes flicked to my parents, who were seated to my right, then to me and to Marcus, who was on my left.
You know, earlier. Underground. Right after... Anyway, he says that the sucking void you felt, followed by the burning sensation, was the two newly forming balls within you absorbing the power."
He was speaking for Ra, as wielding Nekure's chute had exhausted the older being, and he no longer could maintain adequate control of Nekure's body. Once the chaos and confusion had settled, Marcus had ordered most of the Negerettes to either tend to their regular tasks around the underground oasis, or to venture above ground to deal with the approaching helicopter. Just a handful of my personal guards remained in the hall with us, along with my family and close Negerette friends, who were also seated around the rectangular table. Only Dominic was absent. As soon as Marcus had learned it had been Set who had called to warn us of Apep's possession of Marcus, likely saving my life, he had sent Dominic topside to await the helicopter's landing and escort Set down the tunnel into the oasis and to Nguyen's palace to join us.
"So," Nekure said, It looks like the process that'll restore Ma'at has really begun. And Apep, Nikore tossed the crystalline orb containing Apep's inky darkness into the air a few feet, catching it easily, is no longer a threat. He raised the orb in my direction like he was toasting with a glass. Tiny guardians of Ma'at to our rescue, just in the nick of time. One pierced eyebrow arched higher. Remind me to thank the little monsters when they're old enough. Smiling and shaking my head, I gave Marcus's hand a squeeze under the table. It definitely hadn't sunk in yet that I was pregnant with twins who were pretty much going to be gods. Nope, that hadn't sunk in at all. Because when it did, I thought I'd probably faint. My mom shifted in her chair beside me, her attention on Nikure. Now, when you say monsters, do you mean that my grandchildren will be, inhuman? Nikure barked a laugh. Absolutely. Glancing at Jenny, who was seated across from me, between Alexander and Grandma Sue's, he added, well, 2 of them at least. We won't know whether Jenny's kid will manifest or not until the twins come into their power and get rid of the nothingness and return stability to the Ot and all that, which should happen sometime around puberty or so. Or so Ra thinks. He flashed my mom a grin and widened his eyes like he was sharing some exciting news. We're in a bit of uncharted territory here. But anyway, you could end up the proud grandma of 3 inhuman beings. My mom blanched. Bumping my shoulder against hers, I met her warm, brown eyes. They'll be human enough, I assured her, then felt some of the color drain from my own face. I didn't actually know for sure. For all I knew, they might just be as incorporeal as Ra and Apep were in their natural state. Fear churned in my belly, solidifying into a heavy lump. I glanced at Nikure, and when he nodded, I forced a smile and met my mom's eyes. Promise. Do not fret, Alice, Aset said. You will find that a Nezharet child with a shoot is much like any other baby. She flashed her son an affectionate smile. Though sometimes they prove to be a little more trouble, depending on what that shoot enables them to do. Nikure grinned. I sat back in my chair, the events of the past month, not to mention the past hour, finally starting to sink in. A relaxing combination of exhaustion and relief settled over me, overshadowing the rather hearty dose of anxiety I felt every time I thought about the divine lives taking shape within me. Marcus's and my children. And I sighed. We had done it. We had really done it. The universe wasn't going to unravel. My family and friends, everyone, weren't going to die or be unmade or whatever other unpleasant mode of destruction accompanied unraveling. We had done it, saved the world, and now all I wanted to do was to sleep for about a month, safe and snug in Marcus's arms. Marcus's desires were apparently in tune with mine, or possibly it was because our baas were so wholly entangled now, but he draped his arm over my shoulders, leaned in, and pressed his lips against my cheekbone. Let us retire, little Ivanov, little queen. I've always been a selfish man, and I find I'm not in the mood for sharing you right now. He extended the wispiest tendril of his ba and caressed the outer edges of mine, and I drew in a shuddering breath. Heat suffused my cheeks, spread throughout my body, and made me desperate to be alone with him. I cleared my throat. Don't you think we should wait for Dom and Set to get down here? I glanced at the orb of seething obsidian. I mean, what if that's not all of Apep? Marcus pulled away, and he too sighed. It is, I assure you. But how do you know? Laughing bitterly, Marcus shook his head. Because Apep was so convinced of his triumph that he withheld nothing of himself, kept no part of his knowledge separate from me. So believe me, Lex, I know. I bit my lip. Okay, I said, pushing my chair back to rise.
I glanced at the faces of the people sitting around the table, the people I loved, and opened my mouth to excuse myself for the evening. A sharp crack boomed outside the palace, the reverberations echoing throughout the cavernous room. I stared at Marcus. Was that gunfire? He was suddenly on his feet, as were the rest of us. Yes. By the time we reached the main bridge crossing the canal to the tunnel side of the Oasis Cavern, 2 figures stumbled out of the tunnel's mouth. It was Set and Dominic, father and son, looking so strikingly similar. Dominic was leaning heavily on Set, his hand pressed against the lower portion of his ribcage, and his lips tinged red. "Oh my God, Dom!" I exclaimed as I lurched across the bridge ahead of the others and ran up the slightly winding paved pathway toward them. I glanced over my shoulder to call for Neffy, but before I could even say her name, she rushed past me, right behind her father and Set. I turned my attention back to Dominic. He and Set were less than a dozen paces ahead. What happened? I slowed as I took the final few steps. Who? How? Marcus reached them first, helping to ease Dominic down onto an intricately carved odd bench on the side of the pathway.
Who did this? He demanded, his focus intense on Set. I did, Haru. An impossibly familiar voice said from a ways up the path. I raised my head and stared at the 2 shadowed forms standing several hundred yards away in the mouth of the tunnel, and when my eyes confirmed what I had heard, my mouth fell open. Carson? My graduate school peer standing in the ancient ancestral home of my non-human people was yet another impossible thing to add to those I seemed to make a habit of collecting. What are you doing here? He flashed his familiar boyish smile, but it appeared a little strained. I'd love to fill you in, Lex. Some other time. I started shaking my head ever so slowly. Was it possible that he was Nezareth? The implications, it didn't make sense. Kat was beside him. At first I thought their arms were linked, like they had been out for a friendly stroll, but then I realized that Carson's hand was gripping Kat's arm just above the elbow. Focusing on Kat's face, I saw that tears dampened her cheeks and reddened her eyes. He shot Dom, she shrieked, and my mom's... Be quiet, Kat, Carson snapped. He lifted his other hand, and light from the LED cords lining the path glinted dully on dark metal. A handgun. He aimed it at Kat's head. Dom there tells me you've managed to trap Apep, Carson said. Give him to me, and I'll let sweet, innocent Kat here live. He tilted his head to the side and jammed the nozzle of the gun against her temple. Don't, and we'll see. I'll start with Kat, then we'll see how many of you I can take out before you get to me. He grinned that familiar, boyish grin again, and I felt instantly ill. Carson! I took a step toward him, then another. Part of me felt certain that my eyes weren't seeing correctly, that my ears weren't hearing what my brain thought they were hearing. And another part of me felt like I had been punched in the gut. Carson was one of the few people from my past, human life who I had considered a real friend. Was that all a lie? Was he an agent of Set? Of Apep? Like Mike had been? I had been lied to and betrayed by a lot of people over the past year, but that didn't make Carson's betrayal any less shocking or painful. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice sounding hollow as I continued my slow, stunned ascension up the pathway. His lips spread into a weak half-smile, a mere shadow of his usual grin, and he shook his head. You wouldn't understand. You swore an oath to me, Marcus said, appearing at my side. Carson shrugged. Some oaths supersede others. He twisted Kat's arm, making her cry out, and fixed his stare on Marcus and me. I'd stop there, unless you want to see what the inside of a half-manifested Nezareth's brain looks like. And I rather like her, so I'd appreciate it if you didn't force my hand. Marcus and I stopped immediately, neither of us willing to risk Kat's life in a game of chicken. Who are you working for? Who are you working for? Marcus demanded. Frowning, Carson stared up at the cavern's aught ceiling like he was thinking exceptionally hard. I suppose there's no harm in telling you now. When his eyes once again focused on Marcus, he grinned. We call ourselves the kin. I was having such a hard time reconciling my memory of the young archaeologist I had known back in Seattle with his seemingly unstable and undeniably homicidal Nesheret that his words barely registered. Whose kin? Marcus asked. Carson's grin widened. The kin. I'm sure you'll hear more about us soon. I frowned. The kin? I could practically feel the rage crackling around Marcus. What do they want with Apep? Carson shrugged. I only know what my mission is, not why I was assigned it. His eyes flicked to some point beyond us, and I heard footsteps behind me. I risked the briefest glance over my shoulder and saw Nakure making his way up the pathway ever so slowly. He held Apep's small spherical prison up and gave it a little shake. Let the girl start walking this way, and I'll throw it to you. Eyes wide, I stared at Nakure. Was he really considering handing Apep over, after everything we had done to trap him? But the more I considered it, the more I understood his reasoning, and the more I agreed with his decision. It didn't matter who actually had possession of the Apep orb, because only 3 living beings could free him. Nakure and my unborn children. Carson shook his head. Throw it to her, he said to Nakure, and I swear I'll let her go. Your words are worthless, Marcus said, his voice low and cold. You're proving that right now. Carson shrugged. That is a matter of perspective. I met Nakure's eyes while Marcus traded barbs with Carson and, as quietly as possible, said, Can you do anything from here? Nakure shook his head, which meant Carson was too far away for him to use his chute to do anything to stop the younger Nesheret. And as far as I could tell, I no longer had access to Ra's chute at all, so I couldn't do anything, which meant there was only one way out of this new tangle that didn't include anyone else getting hurt. Not that I would have minded Carson suffering a bit, but still. You'll let her go? I asked Carson. You promise? He nodded. Once I have Apep, I'll keep Kat with me as collateral. When we get to the helicopter, it's her choice whether she stays with me or returns here. He paused, then added, Either way, she'll be unharmed. I eyed him, then Kat, who looked absolutely miserable and utterly terrified. And why would she ever choose to go with you? Because her mother is waiting for me back in the helicopter, making sure the pilot remains obedient. One glance at Kat told me his words were true, and I knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't hurt Kat unless he had to. Not if he was working with Jen. Whatever her faults, Genevieve Dubois loved her daughter very much. Fine, I said with a nod. Do it, Nakure. Give him the orb. Marcus slipped his hand into mine and squeezed, all the while glaring at Carson. If you go back on your word, he said, if you harm her, we will hunt you down and make you beg for death. But we will not grant you the release of death, Set said as he took up a post between Nakure and me. Not for years. And when we do, Nakure added, your death will come in the form of a prison of At, slowly crushing you until you are no larger than this. He lobbed the orb containing Apep toward Kat, who caught it with a slight fumble. Concern, or possibly fear, flashed across Carson's face, and he licked his lips. Understood, he said with a nod, and started backing deeper into the tunnel. Don't follow us. Kat, Aset called from beside Marcus. I hadn't heard her approach, but there she stood. I'm sure your mother must love you very much, but know that we do too. She is not the only family you have. Remember that when you make your choice. I thought Kat nodded before the darkness swallowed her completely, but it might have been a trick of the eyes. Poor child, Aset said. She cared for him a great deal. I think she may even have loved him. Such a betrayal. I stared at her, stunned for about the millionth time that day. What? Nakure grunted and crossed his arms. It was merely an infatuation. She'll get over it. I frowned up at the empty tunnel. So much has changed. Indeed, little Ivanov, Marcus said, rubbing his thumb over the back of my hand. Indeed. 50. Now and always. I'm glad you chose to stay, I told Kat. It was the middle of the night, and we were sitting at Dominic's bedside, in his room on the second floor of the Haru Palace, watching his chest rise and fall while his body healed the hole in his lung. He looked older and thinner, but he was alive, thanks to a combination of Nephi and Aset's medical skills and Dominic's own regenerative Nezharet abilities. It wasn't really much of a choice, Kat said. She bit her lip and shot me a sideways glance. I mean, not really. My mom, I don't know what's going on with her. It's like she's been brainwashed or something. And then Carson? She swallowed roughly and looked away, staring at Dominic's shoulder. Her chin trembled. I hate him. If I ever see him again. She squeezed her eyes shut and several fat tears broke free, gliding down her cheek. I never want to see him again. Shaking my head, I reached for her hand. I'm so sorry, Kat. What he did was awful, unforgivable, I know. But your mom... I shrugged. Maybe there's still hope for her. She glanced at me. You think? I honestly don't know, but I promise we'll do what we can to figure it out. That we will, Marcus said from the arched doorway. I looked up to find him and Set walking into the room, one after the other, and felt the oddest sense of déjà vu. It seems so strange to see you both here, but so normal at the same time. I laughed softly as I gave Kat's hand a squeeze and released it before standing and walking into Marcus's open, waiting arms. If not for your clothes, I might believe I'd traveled back in time again. I smiled against his shirt. I kind of miss the kilts. Marcus chuckled. I must admit, I miss seeing you dressed in the attire of that time as well. Set cleared his throat, and my cheeks heated instantly. I peeked at him, offering him a small smile. I am pooped. You'll sit with them for a bit? He nodded. I don't need a babysitter, Kat said. I'm perfectly capable of watching Dom do nothing all by myself. I have no doubt of that, Set said. He sat in the chair I had vacated. But a father... Now, that is another matter entirely. I smiled up at Marcus as he guided me out of the room, with an arm wrapped around my shoulders. He led me to the bedroom that had been mine during the weeks I had spent living in his house so long ago, and shut a very modern-looking odd door. I studied the door for a moment. Nikore? I asked Marcus. He nodded. He's been making his way through the palaces, fixing them up the best he can so our people can start living in them again, if they so choose. Glancing around the room, taking in the ancient, familiar odd furnishings and scattered modern elements, I smiled. You've been staying in here, haven't you? Again, Marcus nodded. But you didn't know it was my room. Not really. Moving in front of me, he ran his hands up my arms, over my shoulders, and trailed his fingertips up the sides of my neck. No, I didn't know. He leaned in, brushing his lips first over one cheek, then the other. But I felt you here, little Ivanov. This was the only place, besides your sanctuary, where I felt closer to you. When I doubted that you'd ever find your way back to me. I gripped the belt loops at his sides and pulled his body flush against mine. But I did find my way back to you. I'll always find my way back to you. Promise me. My eyebrows drew together and I tilted my head to the side, my lips curving into a faint smile. Promise you? Swear to me that you'll always come back. Always. His eyes, so golden and heated, held nothing but demands. So many demands. But I can't travel through time anymore, I said, shaking my head. Just a plain old Nezharet. Why? Just promise me, he demanded. I frowned, but I also gave him what he wanted, even if I didn't understand why he was so desperate for such an unnecessary promise. I swear it, I said.
will always come back to you. And as I made the promise, some deep part of my mind wondered if maybe he knew something I didn't, if maybe I had locked away more memories within his mind, from more time periods than even I knew about. I wondered if maybe my stint as a time traveler wasn't actually over. When Marcus's lips touched mine, when he swept me into his arms and carried me to the bed, when he removed my clothing piece by piece, I seared the promise I had made him into my soul. Whatever happens, I will always find my way back to this man. Always. Okay. That is it for season 3 of Read by the Author. And that is the last episode for Time Anomaly, which is the ECHO Trilogy Book 2. And thank you so much for listening. Okay, so here are the updates for what to expect for the next 2 seasons. So I am going to take the month of December off from recording Read by the Author because there's a lot going on for the holidays and my family, and it would be a lot of juggling. And I'm also trying to finish Darkness Between the Stars, which is the second book in it's like, I don't know if I want to tell you guys, like, this is public information. The first book is her story. Anyway, it's the 3rd series in the ECHO world. So the 2nd series is the Cat Dubois Chronicles. And then the 3rd series is the Fateless Trilogy, which is Tarset's story. So she survives. Spoiler, sorry. I mean, the series is out there. So I'm working on writing book 2 right now. And this will just be a nice, taking this break will be great for letting me finish that manuscript, because I'll be done with that in December. So when I come back to record at the beginning of January, I'll be fresh and ready to go. So the next episode won't be until January 4th, I think, is when it'll go live. I'll be recording it on January 1st. So anyway, but what to expect for the next 2 seasons, this is pretty exciting. I actually know what you're going to get for the next 3 seasons. So what we have coming up is the next season, season 4, is going to be Dissonance, which is the novella, the ECHO Trilogy novella that takes place between Time Anomaly, Book 2, that we just finished, and Ricochet Through Time, Book 3 in the series, and the conclusion to the series. So season 4 of the podcast is going to be Dissonance, the novella between books 2 and books 3 of the ECHO Trilogy. And then we're going to have a in-betweeny season, 4.5, because this is not, I know this is like very scattered the way that this podcast is turning out, or this show is turning out in terms of seasons. But season 4.5 is going to be pretty exciting. So we're going to have a guest host as well as me reading. And the guest host is my co-author for the series, for the Ending World, which includes the Ending series and the Ending Legacy. And that is Lindsey Pogue. And so she and I are going to be reading World After, this one right here. And World After is the prequel book to the Ending Legacy, which is the second series that we have written together in the Ending World. She also has another series in the Ending World. And so it is a prequel. It's not super short, so it's not a novella. It's not super long either, as you can see. But it's probably going to be like 5 or 6 episodes. So that, and then after that, we'll go to season 5 and finish up the ECHO Trilogy with Ricochet Through Time. And then after that, my current plan is just to continue on through the ECHO world. So we'll do the Cat Dubois Chronicles and then the Fateless Trilogy, which by the time we reach the Fateless Trilogy, book 3 should already be out. So yeah, that is what I currently have planned for the show. I hope you're not too disappointed that I'm going to be taking off, that I won't be back with a new episode until January 4th. But this is a much needed break that I need. And yeah, I mean, I'll miss doing the show for the next like 5 or 6 weeks, but it'll be great. It'll be nice and refreshing on my voice. And there is always a chance that I will be recording a few episodes for a different podcast or a different show, which is All World Online. So if you didn't already know about All World Online is my other fiction show. It's not on, if you're watching on YouTube, it's not on YouTube yet, but it is in a podcast. However, I am planning on re-recording what is out because when I recorded it, I didn't have a YouTube channel. So I didn't record video. I only recorded audio. So I'm planning on re-recording it with video and putting that up on YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube, maybe there's always a chance that I might use the time that I'm not recording read by the author to record All World Online. So if you are interested in that, I would just keep an eye out for All World Online, or the best way to stay updated on what I'm doing is to subscribe to my newsletter, which is in the show notes. Regardless of where you're listening or watching, it's right there. And then also, in case you're interested, I do have a Patreon, which is for exclusive serials that I only release on Patreon. And one of those serials is the Nick Chronicles, which I know we're not there yet, but it is the Cat Dubois Chronicles. So the second ECHO Trilogy series, ECHO World. It's the second series in the ECHO World, the one right after the ECHO Trilogy. But I also have released a ton of bonus chapters and alternate POV chapters from the ECHO Trilogy, from Echo and Time, and from Time Anomaly that are only on Patreon right now. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, definitely give it a little peek. And I think that's it for things I wanted to tell you about. Yeah, maybe some of the other links that are down in the show notes. I have a Discord server, which anybody can come and join. It's super fun. If you don't want to join my newsletter, which is the best way to stay up to date on announcements about podcasts and books, also you can follow me on Instagram or Facebook, or sometimes I post on TikTok. I'm really bad about it. I'm trying to get better about it. Instagram's probably the best place because Facebook doesn't show stuff to anybody. So anyway. Oh, or you can listen to Sparks Notes, which is my other show that I do, which is all just author updates. I do that weekly. I'm going to record it right now. I always record it right after this one. So I guess I hope you all have a lovely holiday season for those of you who are listening in real time or watching in real time. And I'll be back in a little over a month. So don't forget about me. Don't forget about the show. I will be back, and it will be awesome. Dissonance is really, really fun story. And I think Ricochet Through Time, book 3, so which will be season 5 of the show, is my favorite book in the series. Probably because Kat is the other main perspective in that book, and like more so even than she was in Time Anomaly. And I feel like Ricochet Through Time is the book where she really becomes Kat, the Kat that we get to see in the Cat Dubois Chronicles, and I love her. So that's it for me, and that's it for season 3, and I'll see you in 2023.